Designing and constructing buildings takes place over many years, with many people collaborating together. In the Brick and Wonder podcast, we have conversations with people who work together to realize a collective vision. I spoke with two people whose collaborations evolved into years of partnership. Robert A.M. Stern, a celebrated architect, architectural writer, and former dean at the Yale School of Architecture. He founded Robert A.M. Stern Architects, following in the footsteps of Paul Rudolph, who said that architecture is a one-man event.
And so I set myself that goal. Some of my classmates could imagine themselves joining a large, established firm, but I didn't.
Over years of practice, Bob came to believe that hiring architects more talented than him leads to the best results. One such architect who Bob hired is Melissa DelVecchio, the other guest we speak with on this podcast. Missy is now a partner at Robert A.M. Stern Architects, among a group of 18 partners. Missy describes a collaborative environment in the firm, which she says is underpinned by a spirit of humility.
We're also building paper and clay models. We're using every tool for what's right at the time to bring the team together, to bring our clients together.
I'm Drew Lang, the founder of Brick and Wonder. This is the Brick and Wonder podcast. Welcome to the Brick and Wonder podcast.
Nice to be on this.
Thanks, Drew.
Well, we're really happy you're here. So I'm going to ask you about 4 different topics that touch the span of your professional career. Founding Robert A.M. Stern Architects, otherwise known as RAMSA, teaching and your tenure as dean over 2 decades at Yale Architecture School, your writing and publishing, which is voluminous, and lastly, your collaborations with your partners at RAMSA. I want to start off by asking you to tell us about your decision to become an architect.
Well, how I decided is it goes back to the myths of time. Somewhere along the way, I decided I wanted to be an architect. I was like 12 or 13 years old. I had no real exemplar to follow in the footsteps of. I did enter at the suggestion of an art teacher in junior high, a competition for high school students sponsored by Pratt Institute, and I placed 3rd, which was pretty high, especially since I had no training. And some of the competitors were a bit older, and they were in programs, high schools or whatever, where they had some introduction to the rudiments of architectural design.
So how about your founding of Robert A.M. Stern Architects, which is now, as I understand it, 250 people with 18 partners? Tell us the beginnings of it.
Well, the emphasis at Yale School of Architecture, when I was a student, was on individual practice. Paul Rudolph was the chairman of the department. He didn't believe in collaborative practices. He was his own boss, as it were, and he had young people working for him, many of them students or former students, but he always said the practice of architecture was a one-man event, a one-person event. So I admired Rudolph. I admired his work. I admired him as a teacher and personality. And so I set myself that goal. Some of my classmates could imagine themselves joining a large established firm, but I didn't. After a year running programs at the Architectural League of New York, I set out on my own after a short stint in Richard Meyer's office. I was a very good employee, and I had the opportunity through family to get some very basic commissions. I joined up with John Hagman, Hagmann. John was in school with me. We started out together. My idea was that he would be the stalwart manager of the firm. He had worked for architects here and there, summers and a year when he took a year off from Yale. And I would be both the lead designer, the work getter through certain contacts, which are evolving from my time at the League, from my friendship with Philip Johnson. And also I was beginning to teach, which was giving me a certain profile in the profession that John did not have. So we entered into a partnership, which lasted about 8 or 9 years, beginning in the late 60s and moving on until I think 1976.
Missy, tell me about your decision to become an architect.
Well, my casual cocktail party analysis says that you often meet people who say they wanted to be an architect and never became one. And then when you meet architects, they tend to fall into two categories. One category is the people who thought they wanted to do it ever since they were small children and maybe didn't even know why. And the other category is people who came to it much later after doing something else or decided it's what they wanted to do in graduate school. I'm the first category. I came home from school in like first or second grade and told my mother I wanted to be an architect or an archaeologist, which is actually a very interesting combination given where I ended up practicing.
And then how about your decision to join Bob and the firm?
So my decision to come here was largely following some friends. So you remember our mutual friend, Jeffrey Pavero, who graduated with you, and he was my seatmate in studio for 2 semesters at Yale, and we became really close friends. And Jeffrey graduated year before and came here, was really enjoying himself. And I came out of graduate school having mostly been at small firms or worked on houses and smaller building types and wanting to try something new, try something more civic, try some bigger buildings, try working for some institutions. And I knew that that was the kind of work that happened here. And Jeffrey really kind of recruited me and thought that I would enjoy what was happening here. And so I decided to give it a try. So when I first came, I really intended only to stay here for a couple of years, see what working on big buildings was like. And I was quite certain I was going to go back to what I'd been doing before, maybe start my own firm, working on residential projects, but I got hooked. I really liked working with leaders at universities and deans and university presidents and people like that, shaping spaces that were for students and that I could visit publicly, take my parents to, not just private homes. And I really got hooked on this idea of working on bigger building types. So I stayed.
That makes sense. And some of the more exciting, noteworthy projects that you've been able to work on are the residential colleges at Yale. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
That was a really interesting kind of once-in-a-lifetime experience because it was such a big project. It was such an honor to go back to a place where I'd been at school and be able to add something to the campus. And it was such a big team. So that team grew from maybe 15, 20 people at the beginning of the project to over 40 as we were finishing our construction documents. I used to joke with the team that we, as a team, could make it to the Crane's biggest firms of New York list as we got to the end of that phase of the project. So, and it went on for 10 years, I think it took us to complete that. We started in 2008, 2 weeks before the crash. So what was intended to be a really quick schedule turned out into a very long schedule. So it was a really interesting time. And it was like running a little mini office inside of an office, which was unique. And I had a lot of great collaborators here.
Congratulations on that. Such an incredible experience and really feat that you and your team achieved. One question about that, how did you and the construction team source the talent?
So a lot of people say that you can't get a building like that built today because the craftspeople don't exist. But the real truth is those people definitely exist. And they're always looking for opportunities to demonstrate their skills and to use their craft. And so it takes a little bit more effort to find them, but they're there. We had a mason who delayed retirement to work on that project, and because he had the opportunity to mentor younger masons on a building with real details and real hand-laid brick. We have a wonderful ongoing relationship with the ironworker who built the gates, who I just saw this morning, who won an award for his ongoing work in that arena.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about that project, too, is that it was a real mixture of traditional craft, but then also the use of technology. So as much as some of those pieces were handcrafted by artisans, others were prefabricated, like some of the vaults under the archways, some of the chimneys on top of the roof, and all of the elements of the tallest tower were actually made by a prefabrication company called BPDL out of Canada.
It's interesting.
It helped with the speed of construction, too.
That makes sense. Bob, Ramsay is known for its commitment to timeless, contextual architecture. What are some of your guiding principles when you founded the firm and as things carry through? And how have some of those principles held up or evolved over time?
Well, that's a big question you're asking. But to begin with, I was from the outset interested in the history of architecture, particularly the history of modern architecture. I thought architecture, to paraphrase, I think Dorothy Parker, ran the gamut of emotions from A to B. And I thought there was much more to architectural language and experience than the modernists of my time or my peers and my teachers had in mind. This was a very restrictive view, but my love of history, conversations with Paul Rudolph and Philip Johnson, particularly among innovative architects seeking to break the mold or the model, I should say, that prevailed, gave me courage to follow suit. And gradually I began, as I had more and more work, to design houses, in particular, interior renovations as well, that learned from the early modernists, but also looked to the work of the late 19th century residential style, which my teacher at Yale and another extremely important mentor, Vincent Scully, had labeled the shingle style. So I have, and I guess from the beginning, a kind of eclectic approach to form. For many of my contemporaries were trying to eliminate as much as possible form as a consideration in favor of sociology, do-goodism, or whatever. I remained the child of Rudolph and Johnson and Scully as a formalist.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like your important early influences were Paul Rudolph and Vincent Scully, primarily.
Well, Philip Johnson also.
How so? Tell me more about how Philip Johnson influenced you. Well, he would come in and out
like a magpie, if you will. At Yale, he would be on reviews, and most of the critics on the faculty, design critics, as well as those who were visitors, would kind of measure the quality of a student's work in terms of the prevailing professional gods. Johnson admired those architects, but he didn't see them as defining the be-all and end-all.
Do you still embrace modernism in the same way you did in your early days of practice?
Well, I think my critique of modernism in the way it was in the 1960s and the way it had become by the 1960s remains central to my work as a designer and as a writer about architecture.
Right. Where do you see Ramsay heading in the next decade?
My hope is my partners will carry the spirit of the firm as I've sought to imbue it.
Tell us more about that spirit, Bob.
Well, always referring to precedent. And not to copy precedent, but to refer to it and to set precedent as the high bar of contemporary work. And too much contemporary work, when I look in the magazines, well, there are hardly any magazines left, but when I see what's being produced, too much of contemporary work has no connection to the past. and it's alienating.
Mm-hmm.
So how many years were you at the firm before you were named a partner?
I became a partner in 2008. So
10 years, roughly.
not quite, because I abbreviated the story originally. I actually left for a couple of years and came back.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. What would you say are the factors that led to you being named a partner?
I think partly I had the right mix of education, between being a Notre Dame undergraduate trained in classical and traditional architecture, and then pursuing a sort of different course of thinking at Yale. I very much had an alignment with Bob and the way he thinks and the way he talks about architecture and thinks about architecture. So certainly that was part of it. I think also resilience and resourcefulness and good working on a team, good bringing teams together and really motivating them. I'm sure some of those things factored into the decision as well.
Tell me, since you've been a partner and presumably new partners have been named since then, as the partner group evaluates what people within the firm to elevate a partner position, what kind of things are you looking for?
It's a little bit more of a defined process than it was when I became a partner, which is a good thing, right? It's become a little bit more tied to our performance review process and the different traits that we evaluate, both skill sets and kind of soft skills that we evaluate through that process. So there's less magic to it and a little bit more systematized now.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's still a lot of discussion that happens as we think about how to grow the group. We're really focused now on thinking about the partnership as a group of people and trying to bring in the right skill sets for the group.
That makes sense.
Let's move to talking about your teaching and your tenure as dean at the Yale School of Architecture. And how, when you were there, did you navigate balancing theoretical knowledge and practical skills? And then I'm going to ask you about your thoughts on how architectural education can best prepare students for the industry.
So architects need to be trained. I do believe in training, the discipline of learning how to make things. I do believe in drawing, hand drawing. It sounds like a given, but many architects no longer do any hand drawing. I think that the relationship of the hand to the eye to the brain is fundamental, and it's too much neglected in too many schools. On the other hand, I wanted to be a dean. I was a dean who set a high bar of having students taught by practicing architects, young ones, but more importantly, experienced ones. When I first accepted the deanship, my first significant act was to ask Philip Johnson and Peter Eisenman to lead a studio. They, in turn, chose as their design project the future of the art and architecture building, as it was then called, which was in a derelict condition as a result of a fire in 1969. And I thought that was an extremely interesting topic. I had nothing to do with their choosing it, but it was a brilliant choice because it asked the students to consider the environment in which they were working, consider its history, speculate about its future, and consider the design of the building as an issue of form making, not as a social issue. So anyhow, that's the direction I encourage the people to participate in.
What would you say one of your proudest moments is from your deanship at Yale?
Well, there were many high points, but I took it as a personal success to get the art and architecture building completely restored according to Rudolph's original design. As best we could manage that goal, given that certain issues of safety and buildability and so on had changed in 40 years. But nonetheless, that was the goal, and we achieved it. And Sid Bass was very generous to provide us with the funds to allow us to make this happen. My only regret is that Paul Rudolph died a couple of years before I became the dean, and of course never saw his building, which had been, I suppose, his pride and joy, certainly of his early career, brought back to the status it currently enjoys again.
How do you feel that the artists are no longer in the building? It's no longer truly the art and architecture building. When I was there, the painters and the printmakers were still in there, and they were very much part of the life of the building.
Well, I think that bringing together the various disciplines was a great dream of Rudolph's, which he shared with Joseph Albers, who at the time when Rudolph was designing the building was the head of the Department of Art. And it was, in a way, a vision of the Bauhaus being revived in terms of mid-1960s practices in painting, sculpture, and whatever. But you can't have everybody, it was a failed vision. Yes, the artists were there with the architecture students, and they met maybe over a cup of coffee in a cafe at the top of the building, but the goals were very different. Also, Albers' idea of art was, in a way, a mirror of the then prevailing way architecture was done, on drawing boards with ruling pens, and the machine, the computer, had no role in either discipline. And even sculpture, hammering away at solid matter.
Yeah. Missy, tell me more about your collaborations with Bob over the years and how working with Bob has influenced your approach to design and leadership.
So I have to start with my first day in the office, which is kind of a funny and good story. And I was very late because I was commuting from my parents' house in Connecticut. I didn't have an apartment yet. And there were terrible thunderstorms the night before and all these trains on the Metro North track. And no cell phones. So I'm sitting on the train, left super early, still more than 2.5 hours late, wondering what everyone was going to think when I got here. And I remember my father said to me before I left the house, he's like, it's a new job. All you're going to be doing is filling out forms. It's a big firm. No, you're not going to see anybody. Don't worry about it. And I'm sitting on the train getting more and more nervous. I show up, and our receptionist at the time liked to entertain herself by mimicking different accents and voices. So she greeted me in a British accent and said, well, hello, Mr. Stern is waiting for you in the conference room, and pointed to a door at the end of what felt like an interminably long corridor. And I thought it was a joke. I had friends who worked here. Jeffrey was here. I had other friends who worked here. I was certain that this was a joke, and there were friends and donuts on the other side of the door. I opened the door, and it was, in fact, all of my friends, no donuts, and Bob sitting around a table together working on a competition. And lucky for me, I guess, one of my professors, Tom Beebe, who's a notable Chicago architect and was a friend of Bob's, called him to say that, I was a talented young student and he should pay attention to me. And so he had decided to put me on this competition from day one. And he told me that Tom had put in a good word for me and immediately asked my opinion of what was on the wall. So my first question was, what is it? Where is it? Because I knew nothing. And then for the next 8 weeks, I did not have a desk. I was stationed in that conference room where we had set up a kind of war room for this competition, which was for the Nashville Public Library in Nashville, Tennessee. And I worked with Bob coming in to check in on me over my shoulder every day for 6-8 weeks together with that team of friends of mine. And so I think it made it a really comfortable working environment for me. I was able to develop a real rapport with Bob, I think, very quickly. And I wasn't intimidated by the bureaucracy of the firm or by the bigness of the firm, because it was all very small for me in that first 8 weeks. It was all in that conference room.
That's amazing. What other memorable experiences did you have with Bob over the years that stick in your mind?
Well, there's one that I think about a lot, which was the Baker Library at the Harvard Business School. It was a big renovation project, and I was the project architect, which was really a kind of nice elevation of responsibility. And the Harvard Business School was really formal. Meetings with the dean were planned well in advance. Everybody knew that he was going to approve what was put in front of him. And, they were things that Bob did. And I was up there, from my perspective, to help set up the room and take good notes. And so we set up all our drawings and boards in the room. And about 2 minutes before the dean came in, Bob said, I think Melissa's going to make the presentation today. And he just threw me in there. And, he knew I was ready. He knew I'd been presenting to him for weeks and months. He knew I'd been presenting to the client group. And I think I knew that he trusted me in that moment. I knew that he appreciated my contributions in that moment. And I knew that he was thinking about a way to get me engaged in a way that wouldn't make me nervous. And I really appreciated that. And I remember that. And I try to do things like that for others on my teams.
That's really great. I love that.
Let's turn to talking about your books and your publishing. How many books have you written and published, Bob?
Oh, I have no idea. But
More than 20.
Probably. Who's counting? There are two major kinds of books I've been involved with. First, to document the firm's work, my work and others, on a systematic basis. And there I had in mind Le Corbusier's obsessive documentation of his own work, the complete works, which students would consult carefully. And the second thing was, and it grew out of my love of New York City, and it grew out of a situation that I encountered when, as faculty member at Columbia, the university, the architecture school, I beg your pardon, was about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. 1981 would be that year. Well, how are we going to take this responsibility to celebrate our history on? And a few of us thought a history of the school would be very valuable. So I agreed to take a leadership role in that, although others were very much involved, Richard Plunz and so forth. But that got me involved in looking at the first years of the school, 1881, and the late 19th century. And it coincided with not only my interest, but the school's interest in historic preservation. Many the academic buildings of the late 19th century were being threatened with destruction. The most notable talisman of the destructive mode of modernism with regard to its non-modernist past was the destruction of Pennsylvania Station in 1963. But here we were in 1981, and helped by Gregory Gilmartin and John Massengale, we attacked the problem of the years coinciding with the founding of the school, the architecture and the critical writing in that period. And solely John Franco Monticelli was very happy to publish a book. People were desperately interested in that, and it was architects and the lay public. That got me started in thinking, well, we should do other periods. And I have taken this story up to the millennium. And when I did that, I thought, okay, I'm done. But I then realized that there was more to be told. And so with David Fishman and Jacob Tylov, we're putting the finishing touches on New York 2020, which takes the story from the extraordinary exuberance of the millennium celebrations through the catastrophe of the pandemic around 2020. That will be, without doubt, my last effort on that. Other books I've done document the history of architectural education at Yale.
Right. Looking more broadly than the school's architectural education in New York, how do you think about the evolution of architectural literature and the significance of publishing architectural books?
I mean, there's a lot of writing about architecture, which isn't really about architecture. It's about theoretical speculations which connect to thoughts in other disciplines and tends to read in a dense way and tends to distract the reader, or attempts, it would seem, to distract the reader from the fundamentals of building art. I only think about what I'm doing in that regard. There has been a rediscovery of important, but for a long time ignored figures. Peter Penoyer is doing a great job resuscitating the careers of important, particularly New York architects, mostly trained around 1900 at the established universities, Columbia and Yale, most notably, and then going on to France to refine their education, to expand and develop their approach. His books have been excellent. I have to take credit for my own effort in writing about George Howe, but I seized upon Howe because he had managed to have a very academic training at Harvard and the Beaux-Arts, then to practice successfully with partners in Philadelphia, to be supported in his work with an important local architect with national reputation, Paul Philippe Cray, and in turn, Howe would support younger architects, most notably Louis Kahn, and also because Howe evolved from a traditionalist to a modernist and then backstepped a bit in search of a kind of synthesis, which he labeled training for the practice of architecture. So I wrote a book about him. Yale Press was kind enough to publish it.
So I want to move towards your collaboration with partners at Ramsay. Let's start out talking about the skills and qualities that you look for and that your other senior partners look for when selecting new leadership to join the leadership group.
It's no secret that our office is filled with Yale-trained architects, Columbia-trained architects, Princeton, and Notre Dame. Missy DelVecchio was not a student of mine, but she had so many. She like some others from Notre Dame, went on to do postgraduate work at Yale, which gave her a really interesting take on contemporary practice, that eclectic approach, which I embrace myself and value. And she was an icon among students of her time. So that Mark Gage, who came from Notre Dame, he worked in our office and then went to Yale. I encourage lots of people who came from Notre Dame eventually to then go on, take a year, 2 years really, at Yale. I think Yale became and is a very important gateway to the world of architecture.
Tell me about how you and Bob and people in the firm in general make really big decisions. You know, these really key decisions that move the culture and the direction of the firm.
One of the really good things we've done is hire a real CEO. So Lisa Matkovic is our CEO. And we've also decided to make a relatively small group of partners, which we call the management committee, which really works very hard to work through these decisions and come to the larger partnership with all of the research done and all of the decisions kind of teed up in a neat way to either elicit feedback or to get a decision. And so that's been really helpful. Hiring is a little bit different because that gets to another thing that we've done recently, which is change our internal organization. So at one point, we had a number of different studios that were a little bit more personality based and had kind of grown organically over time. And some of the studios had 5 people in them, and some of the studios had 50 people in them. And we decided that we needed to be a little bit more orderly about that. And so we've now created 3 studios, which work on a mixture of different building types, but they're mostly aligned by building type. And so that got us to groups that were more similar in size, that had the same number of partners assigned to a studio, maybe the same number of associate partners assigned to a studio. So we now have these, I think, more manageable cohorts. And each one of those studios has a staffing coordinator and a talent coordinator. And those people work very hard to bring decisions to the leadership within each studio about hiring and about talent development. So one person's really focused on hiring and staffing, and then the talent coordinator is really focused on making sure that once people get here, they're getting the experiences that they need to get to help them grow.
And how big are each of those groups?
Probably in the 40 to 60 person range. Which has been really great. And that's only been going on for about a year now, year and a half maybe.
Related to all this, how do you and the firm facilitate collaboration, both within the firm among people and with outside collaborators? How do you think about it generally, culturally, day to day and high level?
It probably happens a little bit differently across the office. It might depend a little bit on the project size or the project type. Sometimes we're actually even collaborating with other architecture firms. So on our larger projects, 50% of the time we're collaborating with another firm in another place. I think we might be a lot more interactive than other architecture firms. Some people working on computers, of course, some people collaborating on a conference table, people building models together, people having pinups together. It made me realize that something we always say and we always knew, which is our office is a little bit more like a studio environment in school. We're always using all the tools in our tool belt. So we're modeling things in the computer. We're doing virtual reality. We're also building paper and clay models. We're using every tool for what's right at the time to bring the team together or to bring our clients together around the table to discuss what's happening and whatever's going to help us get to the right decisions in the most efficient manner.
I mean, it sounds like, integrated into the culture is humility too. It's interesting, right? Because, Bob and with his external persona doesn't necessarily project a humility, but presumably there is a strong sense of humility that's there. It comes through in the culture at large and, in this dynamic of curiosity and, the importance of asking questions, in essence saying, I don't know this, I better go to the expert, right? So yeah, tell me a little more about that.
Humility is really a good word for it. It's really thinking about how the buildings are going to be used and what role they're playing in the cities, towns, and campuses that make up our world, right? Sometimes a building needs to be the star player or the diva, and sometimes the building is the chorus line member, and sometimes the building is the seat in the audience, right? I mean, all of those roles go into making a city. Sometimes you need background that's for street life and community, and sometimes you need places that draw people together, and each of those things has a role. And so I think that when we talk about context, it's not always about the style of the building. Sometimes it's really more simply about the role that building needs to or wants to play in its place, either in a city or on a campus or in a town. Mm-hmm. And, some architects, I think, separate themselves from that. They say, I'm an architect, I'm not an urbanist, I'm not concerned with those issues. Maybe because I went to Notre Dame, where all of those things are considered to be completely enmeshed and important to be considered together. And maybe because I had Vincent Scully as a teacher who was instilling in everyone the value of really carefully observing what's happening around you and understanding how that all contributes to the life of a place and the life of a city. But those things are really important to me, and I think they're really important to everyone here at the firm.
Yeah, thanks for that, Missy.
Well, I do want to ask you more about Melissa DelVecchio. She was a student at Yale who you hired. She came to work for you and then evolved to become a partner in your firm. How did that happen?
Well, people become more and more central to the operation of any organization. And in the case of ours, she's articulate, she's talented. There are not so many women in the profession and who stay with the profession. That is a problem of women in architecture. In Missy's hands, projects became more important, and clients respect that, so that her work on the Yale residential colleges was central. But she had the historic background. She added to that through research. I haven't used the word research, but design research is extremely important. The first place you go when you start a new project is the library. What did people do with this kind of building before? When we were doing the colleges, Missy led a team which had many from both Yale and Notre Dame. Yale and Notre Dame turned out to be a wonderful hot combo, as it were. Missy was quite knowledgeable about the world of ideas, but I think her time at Yale, which was before my time as dean, broadened her perspective.
You talked about how early in your career you saw yourself as a solo designer, some singular visionary. As your practice evolved, you collaborated with more and more people, and presumably a collective vision and a dynamic of collaboration took hold. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, if you say that architectural practice is like an orchestra, someone has to lead the band. He may not be the most accomplished musician in the group, but he knows how to bring out of the group the very best possible music. So that may be what my job has evolved into. I early on realized I would say to people, look, I'm not hiring you to be as talented as I am. I'm hiring you to be more talented than I am, which was not Paul Rudolph's attitude. He tended to think nobody could do things as well as he could do them. And to maybe an extent, that was true. But funnily enough, I remember him saying often that pretty drawings do not an architecture make. So he knew the limitation of drawings, but I think he got trapped in his own ego, and he's a very complicated person.
So if you were your younger self just starting into the profession, right, just starting at Ramses A, what would you advise your younger self or other younger people starting out?
A lot of different thoughts come to mind. I think younger people coming into the profession find communication to be a little bit hard. And they've come up using email or not having direct conversations with someone where there's a real sharing and a back and forth. They're hoping someone might show them what to do and how to do it so they can repeat it, maybe. And there's always a diplomatic way to engage in any conversation. And I think we all have to learn how to do that to get people to share what they really care about and share what's really going to get the best result for the project or the best result for the team. So I think that's one part. I think another thing that's really interesting right now is with the advent of technology, it's so much easier to work on your own in a way. And I wonder whether, if I were my younger self, I wonder if I would be thinking about different innovative ways to create a practice that maybe are not the traditional architecture practice that you and I came up with choices. You're going to be in a small firm, you're going to be in a big firm, you're going to have your own firm. I have a funny feeling, well, I know there are more choices open now, and I have a funny feeling that there are going to be many more choices opening up to people in the years to come. And I sort of thinking about non-traditional practices or consulting services that you might be able to offer, or different ways of collaborating with people across the world. I mean, in the end, architects are really amazing problem solvers and puzzle doers. And I think if we could sell our talents for thinking through problems more so than sell the way a design looks, we might be able to have more effect on the world in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more that communication is so critical to professional success, and it can't be emphasized enough. What about a mid-career professional? What would you advise them?
I think you have to look out and make sure that you're getting the opportunities that you want to have, and you're getting the experiences that you want to have, and you're trying things out. You can't expect that those opportunities are going to be handed to you. It's going to take some level of communication with the people at your firm and leadership at your firm to let them know what it is that you really want to be doing and why. I think sometimes people assume that those things might be very transparent to the people who are working with them or the people who are running their firm. And it's not always. I think it's always helpful to build relationships, across every level at your firm where you're comfortable talking to people, because that's the way you're going to get the experiences that you want to have. I think the other piece of advice that I would give is just not to be overly directed about what you want those experiences to be, because sometimes something comes to you that you didn't expect, and you end up liking something that you didn't expect to enjoy. And so keeping yourself open to those different kinds of experiences that you should just try and see how it works out. I mean, I'm a perfect model for that. If you had asked me what I'd be doing when we graduated, I'd say, I think I want to have a small firm in Connecticut doing houses for people. It's not at all what I'm doing. And it's not at all what I'm doing because I tried some things and took a chance and discovered a path that I hadn't thought I wanted.
It's good advice.
Bob, there's a closing question that we customarily ask, which is, if you could change one thing about our profession, what would you change?
Well, I think I've done a lot to change it all already. The mindless modernism or mindless modernity, I tried to change, and I think I have, but it's a constant uphill battle. Try to get architects to think about their own traditions and also to address the diversity of cultures which they encounter. You cannot just go in and do it your way. My own thing, Missy's own thing, is the thing that seems most rooted in the place. I don't want to make it seem either or.
Mm-hmm.
The individual insight into the place is what produces a work of architecture that has identity that can be recognized in the mass and on the individual level.
Uh-huh.
There is this growing sense that I've felt over the course of my career that architects need to specialize. And I think our education and our career trains you to do just the opposite, trains you to be a good problem solver, ask the right questions, come up with innovative solutions. And we get so many requests for proposals now that say, we need a computer science building on a brick campus on a corner that faces the commercial street on a 5-acre site for this many students. Show us the 5 things just like that you've done in the last 5 years. That's crazy. I mean, I don't know what the purpose of that would be. I think if people were more open to everything that architects can bring to them in terms of thinking, they wouldn't be so tied to this risk-averse approach of wanting a demonstrated expertise in a certain building type. In a way, what we have is expertise in making places and making cities and making buildings of all different types. And so I know I would love to do some building types I've never worked on before, and it's very hard to break into them sometimes. And if you think about it, I don't think Eero Saarinen made the best TWA terminal because he'd done 15 airports in the last 5 years. I mean, he was bringing new thinking to a new building type. And somehow a little bit of that's lost. And I think people are expecting more and more specialization. And I don't think it's the healthiest thing for the profession.
There needs to be more openness, more awareness on the part of clients, reaching out to professionals and, considering their hiring process. So how would we go about helping them develop that awareness?
Yeah, I don't know how to help them develop that awareness, but I do feel like the things that they should be looking for are someone you're comfortable talking to, someone you're comfortable asking questions of, someone you're comfortable expressing your vulnerabilities or your worries about your institution or your own house or whatever it might be. It's like you need to find the right person that you want to collaborate with. Your show's all about collaboration. This is about collaboration.
That's a perfect answer, I think. Thank you, Missy.
Thank you, Drew.
Really appreciate it, Bob.
That was Robert A.M. Stern, the celebrated architect, writer, and former dean at the Yale School of Architecture, and Melissa DelVecchio, a partner at Robert A.M. Stern Architects. Bob is currently at work on his 36th book, New York 2020, set to be published by Monticelli Press in the fall of this year. And Melissa is currently leading institutional projects, including the Yale Schwartzman Center and the Rachlin Murphy Museum at the University of Notre Dame. Together with the 18 partners at Robert A.M. Stern Architects, Bob and Melissa continue leading the firm. Thanks so much for joining us. This episode was produced by the team at Radio Kismet, including Christopher Plant and Justin Berger. The production and editing staff also included Brick and Wonder team members Ed Thompson, Carrie Potter, Roya Osuli, and Amanda LaFontaine. I'm Drew Lang, and you've been listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast.